So, The Acolyte.
Well, let me try to talk about this without getting fired or murdered.
No, let me just interrupt you. I've just got a few questions. Is this disrespectful to everything that has come before?
Yes.
Does it fail to fit in with the continuity and the timeline of the universe as a whole?
Yes.
Does it fail to even follow the law that it introduces itself?
Yes.
Is it damaging to the IP?
Yes.
And just lastly, is it fair to describe it as just being, well, shit?
Yes. Yes.
Well, there you have it, guys. Joking aside, well, it is actually the truth. We finally come to The Acolyte. Now, unfortunately, I have had to get onto this train a few episodes later than I would have liked. While I was able to avoid having to make 3 videos before this one of me losing my mind, I have had to watch 4 episodes of The Acolyte back to back, which, trust me, is very difficult. The sad truth is, Star Wars is dead. Now, did The Acolyte kill it? No. I wouldn't even say that it finished it off. Star Wars is a corpse, and has been for a long time. I'd argue you could probably trace the sign of its demise back to the acquisition by Disney. I never liked The Force Awakens, and things just got worse from there. Now, you can argue that Rogue One is perhaps 2/3 of a good film, if you're being generous. And the Andor season was passable once you got past the first 3 episodes. And Mandalorian season 1 was okay. But we have to remember that Star Wars, at its core, is a cinematic universe. Something for the big screen. Once we knock out the 2 TV season shows, we're left with 2/3 of a good film. And I'm pretty sure that apart from Rogue One, no one would really argue that there's a significant amount of anything worthwhile in Disney's Star Wars. And all that it really has served to do is murder the IP. Now, if we look at The Acolyte, basically is that last cell which is just giving up the ghost. What do we really get from this show? Shit. That's the easiest way to describe it. I mean, if I was to rattle it off, it'd be logical inconsistencies, horrible cringe fests of scenes, and a dialogue that feels like it was written by a child, and that's probably offensive to most children. The overall story is absolutely diabolical, serves to damage everything that is the core of Star Wars with the potential messaging that they are giving, especially when you could argue that the hero and the anti-hero are effectively just Anakin's story before his time, and ultimately serves to damage the core fundamentals of what made the original Star Wars story from episode 1 to episode 6 what it was. So you can look at The Acolyte as an attempt to irreparably damage, taint, or just appropriate the legacy of Star Wars to serve whatever the latest message is that Disney's trying to push and brainwash basically the next generation with. And it would be easy to look at Star Wars and say that it's just damaged beyond beyond all recognition. If it wasn't so easy to draw a line in the sand between good Star Wars and this message-laden sludge that's produced by Disney. Now, I would recap episode 1 to 3, but I don't think I can take it, and I wouldn't want to subject any of you to it either. So, we'll start with episode 4. So we start the episode properly following the Wookiee Jedi, Kel Naka, into, I guess, his house, or where he's staying at the moment in the forest. And then when we get inside his house, his humble abode, we start seeing a whole load of signs everywhere. Signs like the tattoo that's on the evil twin's head. So I assume that this is going to have something to do with something at some point. If you didn't get that, there's a lot of somethings. And then we join the evil twin and the fake poison merchant, or whoever he's supposed to be, landing on the planet, setting off to find Kelnacker to kill him. And the thing I would just like to add, which will become relatively important soon, is these seem to know where they're going. Now I interrupt proceedings to bring you a blast from the past. Remember this?
Impossible. The Sith have been extinct for a millennia.
Now that was Ki-Adi-Mundi, and this guy here is Ki-Adi-Mundi. So you might be asking, why is that so important? Well, very simply, because apparently the Sith have not been seen in 1,000 years. Because what's happening here is they are watching the evidence of Evil Twin, basically, and her combat style. Someone who was killed, well, one Jedi. I'm not giving her the credit of supposedly killing the one that wanted to die and killed himself, through martial prowess, I guess. And they're basically discussing that she's had training, and that they're worried that there could be malevolent powers, which would scream Sith to me. But obviously Ki-Adi-Mundi told the council, of which he is a member, that they haven't been seen in 1,000 years. However, these Jedis also turn around and say that they are going to keep everything from the council, because then the council will have to tell the Republic. So yeah, again, what Disney is doing is trying to destroy the established universe, damage the IP irreparably. Because the whole thing about Star Wars is that the Sith are bad and the Jedi are good. But they keep trying to paint the Jedi as being morally questionable. And now what they're producing is that the Jedi have ultimately covered this up, at best. That then has ramifications for Ki-Adi-Mundi as well. Bearing in mind that his race is only supposed to live, I think it's 60 to 70 years, and this is supposed to be set at least 100 years prior to the prequel trilogy, meaning that he should be long dead. He shouldn't exist. So that in itself doesn't make a lick of sense. But more importantly, they're now writing themselves in a corner where they somehow now have to stitch this together with the prequels, or just leave logical inconsistencies within the Star Wars universe. Because even if we ignore that he should not be alive in the prequels because of when they've introduced him here, you're then willfully having him mislead the Jedi Council, unless this individual turns out not to be Sith. But the red lightsaber kind of gives it away a little bit. And obviously we do see the individual with the red lightsaber later in this episode. So through various plot contrivances and horrible logic, we find a situation where just about everyone we've been introduced to who is a Jedi, and Twin who can't use the Force, are on their way to find Kelnacker. Now, one point I would just like to make, for an already very short episode, realistically, because episode 4 is only slightly over 30 minutes, and if you take out title roll and credits, it gets fairly significantly shorter. There are the obligatory dead space events within the IP as a whole. And this is not something that is just unique to The Acolyte. If we look at all of The Mandalorian, Boba Fett, any scene where there is a landing sequence or a ship coming into the system and then approaching a planet, we get the whole thing, including an elongated, usually 10 to 30 second scene of the ship just entering the atmosphere and then landing. And this happens, I would say, on average, potentially 2-3 times in most Star Wars episodes that Disney produces. And it just leads to an already short episode having even less content than it already does. So they all land and go to the locals, I guess, and then start asking, where's the Wookiee? Because no one, apparently in the Jedi Order, would have thought that the Wookiee might have gone to the forest. Yeah, it doesn't quite make sense. And then we get introduced to this creature, who is essentially a rat mole bloodhound. Something like that, maybe? And they wave a rag in his face, even though I'm pretty sure no one's supposed to have seen Kelnaka for years. So I'm guessing that they just found a random loincloth or robe or something that he left lying around in his room for all of that time. I mean, I'm not even sure if his scent would still be on it after that length of time. But for the purposes of the show, yeah, it is. Again, it just stinks of plot contrivance. Now here's a further example of a plot contrivance. The way a scent works is it dissipates, and the only way that this rat mole bloodhound thing would be able to actually keep that scent is if Kelnaka had been to where they landed and moved back from there. You would think realistically recently. And yet every single person that they asked at the landing site had not seen a Wookiee. So, are we to believe that this little bloodhound creature thing was able to pick up his scent over potentially tens, if not hundreds of miles, and track him even though there is no scent trail to track? So we finally get a scene where a lightsaber is lit up to actually fight something, other than right at the beginning of episode 1. Because the only other time we've really seen a lightsaber be ignited was as a flashlight, or for pointless endeavours. But the thing with this scene that I don't really understand is they're walking through a wood, clearly with stuff attached to the trees, and yet none of them seems to bat an eyelid. Until, of course, Good Twin touches one of them, and I refuse to use their normal names, so I'm just going to refer them to them as Good Twin and Evil Twin, and wakes one of them up. But they're quite clearly dangerous, and no one seems to care. Even to the point where they go, oh, they're attracted to light. It's getting dark soon. It's something that they should be wary of. These are supposed to be Jedi who are in touch with all living things through the living force. They should have known that these were an issue before they were an issue. So the evil twin has a change of heart, decides that she loves her sister, and because her sister's alive, it changes everything. She's just going to turn herself into the Jedi, face their justice, but apparently there won't be any ramifications for her killing 2 Jedi because of what she knows. So she traps the evil apothecary dude in a trap. Just have to say, evil apothecary dude could also be the Sith. That's one of 3 possibilities that I can think of. So honestly, where they're going to go with this, I don't really know. Because they're painting her out to be an absolute moron. It's a bit of missing context here. Basically, she runs towards where Kelnaka is, trips, and falls directly in front of the bloodhound, mole, ferret, mouse, whatever the hell it is, thing. It screams, so the Jedi run after her, direct to Kelnaka's home, but with the face acting that's going on, clearly something is amiss. So Evil Twin enters the house to... I don't even know what she's going to do now. I mean, at one point she's going to kill him, then she's going to surrender. If she was going to surrender, why would she have ran away from all of the Jedi that were there? Why wouldn't she have just turned herself into them rather than specifically running to Kelnaka? So is she actually going to kill Kelnaka? I just don't understand. Because if her whole plan was to reach Kelnaka and turn herself in, then logically speaking, when she ran into her sister and all of the Jedi that were with her sister, she would have just turned herself in, surely. But lo and behold, Kelnacker is dead. Single saber wound to the chest. The one thing I will say is it is nice that Disney have actually shown lightsabers to not be a complete joke and actually able to kill someone. Because as some of you might be unfortunate enough to remember, we did have the wonderfully atrocious Ashoka, where we were shown this. And this is in the same universe where we have the undiluted, unadulterated, uncorrupted vision of Star Wars as this. Now granted, that was from the George era of Star Wars, where things made a bit more sense, and lightsabers were actually something to be feared. But within Disney's universe, we've got a small slash to the chest apparently kills a Wookiee, who are known for being incredibly resilient, and we've got a lightsaber stab straight through the body, something which is supposed to be superheated plasma, capable of melting blast doors, goes straight through a human, who are well known for being not resilient, and her being completely fine. And this is what I mean about Star Wars, specifically Disney Star Wars, being full of logical inconsistencies. Even better, the wound is still smoking, so the Sith is still here. And lo and behold, we are introduced to Smiler. And again, we have the obligatory lightsaber ignition, which, for all intents and purposes, is completely and utterly useless in this episode, because everyone ignites their lightsabers, and Smiler just blows everyone away with a force push. And that's it. Fade to black. Now, I'll be honest, I've gotten through that much quicker than I normally would, because I just feel like there's so little to say about Episode 4. Now, you might ask why I think there's so little to talk about. I mean, the reality is, the entire episode was only about 32 minutes. By the time you lopped everything out, that was completely extraneous. So, the credits, the title sequence, you're looking at a good amount less than 30 minutes. By the time you knock out the landing scenes, you're going to lose another minute and a half. Then you've got a lot of walking with nothing happening. And if we look at the main points, you've got something like, once you take everything out, it's like 1/6 of the episode was spent in the Jedi hologram room when they're talking about the potential of a dangerous Force user and suggesting that they're trained by a Jedi. And not really much was said there, other than we are now led to believe that Ki-Adi-Mundi is a liar, and that the Jedi are covering things up, things which have happened. What happened on the planet with the two twins and the lesbian cabal. It's a perversion of everything that we're supposed to believe about Star Wars. There's no other way to put it than that. The whole point about Star Wars is that it is good and evil. And the Jedi are good, and the Sith are evil. It just feels like they're trying to get the Jedi to a point where they can paint them as not being good, or doing evil for the perception of doing good. Or maybe they'll turn it and they will do good, but can be perceived as being evil. But either way, it's introducing the possibility to anyone who watches this that the Jedi are somehow the bad guys in this scenario. That they are somehow the people who have caused all of these events to happen. If that's the case, if the IP was even still salvageable, Which at this point, I think you're probably looking at, if they keep going down the TV show route, they'd probably need to have 2 or 3 impeccable seasons to even remotely try to win everyone back. And then, the best thing that they could do would be to decanonize everything that they've produced and delete it the same way that they did with Willow. Just pretend it does not exist and start from scratch. And if they went back to the cinematic universe, then they'd almost certainly need at least 3 epic blockbuster films in order to try to repair the damage. And again, the best thing that they can do is delete every film that they've made. With the exception, perhaps, of Rogue One. Which I don't think that they're going to do, because they would have to then acknowledge their failure. Which we already know they're not capable of actually doing. I mean, Iger can turn around and say that, oh yeah, we're learning from our mistakes, but then continue to just release the same rubbish that they've been releasing for years now. I mean, it would be a hard pill to swallow, but what they should probably do is delete anything and everything which is still in production and just start from scratch. Because at least then they can't do any further damage to the universe that they've created. But other than that, I just don't know how they can salvage Star Wars now. If you'd have asked me last year, I would have said that what they needed to do was they needed to get themselves out of this time frame. They needed to stop pumping content in between the prequels, and they needed to stop and completely move away from pumping in content between the prequels and the original trilogy, and between the original trilogy and the, I guess, new trilogy. And they needed to move to a different timeline completely. So, maybe 50 or 100 years in the future from that point, where the Jedi Order has been rebuilt and something happens. Or, better yet, go back and visit something like the Old Republic, where you had lots of Sith, lots of Jedi, and massive battles. And they could have done something with that. Or they could have also done something like the Darth Bane trilogy and brought that to the big screen, about how the Sith went from an enormous empire to 2 individuals through the rule of 2. All of those would have been better ideas. Instead, what they did was they produced this crap, which technically is outside of the timeline which they are saturating, in that it is 100 years prior, or so we were led to believe, because at this point it could be only 20 years prior, which is based on books which were lucky if they sold in the thousands. So I just really don't think that there's any hope for Star Wars, and from what I've seen so far from this season, this could actually be worse than Ashoka. And I did not think that that was possible. But with that, I'll see you round in episode 5. That's it from me, so that's it for you.